Good morning. Hola, bonjour, dumelang, and hello from South Africa, from Africa to South Africa to Africa. And today on our Campus Party South African edition, we're going to be talking about animation and reaching particularly the youth of our continent and of the developing world. And I've got two extraordinary talents and people who really know their stuff. Firdoze Bulbulia will be kicking us off, and she'll tell us all about what she's done with her amazing life. And then we move on to Gillis, who runs Seamonster, an animation company in Cape Town, but both of them are real millennials, the real slasher generation. They've done so much, and we've got so much to learn from them. So hugely looking forward to the session, and thank you both for joining me. Firdoze, I'm literally going to hand the floor to you. Please tell us all about who you are, what you've done, and you are particularly passionate about human rights, children's rights. You work with massive global bodies, you formulate policy, and above all else, you make amazing video documentaries, massive channels. And you've got a wonderful new animation project for youth, which is featuring across our government channels. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, Kathy, and it's wonderful to be here at the campus party. My name is Firdoze Bulbulia, South African. I'm an independent filmmaker producer. But I think I started off really as an activist, and I'm still an activist. My daughter keeps asking me when I'm going to grow up. I'm very happy to be an activist. I will remain one. So in 1980, during high school, I was detained, so I spent time in prison. And I think that kind of activism remains in your DNA, and that's what I do. I was involved in drawing up the South African Children's Rights Charter when South Africa only had 4 provinces, and we traveled the length and breadth of the country to talk to young people about their rights. Of course, we had many adults telling us that we shouldn't give children rights because children need to be in their place. And as you know, children should be seen and not heard. So that was a huge challenge in the beginning. And we really had to explain to people that with rights come responsibilities, and therefore you have a right to certain things, but you have a responsibility. This was long before UNICEF was even allowed into South Africa because of apartheid. And so the work that we did was from 1993. We then drew up the South African Children's Charter. So this was about children's rights. In 1995, and we can show this now, is the Africa Charter on Children's Broadcasting, which is a document that we started, and we ensured that the rights in terms of broadcasting rights for Africa's children, particularly South African children, was placed on the global agenda. Could we please show the charter right now, if that's possible? Because I like to quote article number 4 from the charter, which says children should see, hear, and express themselves, their languages, and their life's experiences through the electronic media that reaffirms your sense of self, community, and place. Remember, kind of pre-94, television in South Africa was basically black and white. You saw white children in white communities, in white suburbs, living white lives. You didn't see black children, you didn't see rural children, you didn't see poor children. You didn't hear any other language except English and Afrikaans. So we had a huge job in terms of ensuring that all 11 languages were somehow heard on television, and that young children could be proud of who they were as African children. This does not detract who you are within the South African context. As you know, we have 4 racial groups. So we have Indians, we have coloreds, we have whites, and we have Africans. But if we look at the demographics, we know that the bulk of our country is Black African. And therefore, we need to be able to see the images of Black children and rural children, because most of South Africa is in fact rural. Many people don't realize that. So the Africa Charter was signed and adopted by every single broadcaster on the African continent, including at the time the Commonwealth Broadcasting Association, the ORTNA, which was the Union of Radio and Television for Africa, and SABA, which is the Southern African Broadcasting Association. The charter then became the guidelines for all broadcasters, because there was nothing in terms of how do we produce content for children? If you remember, Kathy, and you were quite amazing during your period at the SABC yourself. You remember that the kind of content that went out really didn't talk to our new South Africa. It also didn't talk to children in particular. And at the time, I have to say, in '94, many of the people who are still ministers, unfortunately, because we need to pass the baton, 26 years later, you would say to me, oh, Firdoze, you know, yes, of course, our children have rights, but right now it's almost as if the UN, you know, Declaration on the Rights of the Child, a right to a home, a right to education, a right to food, a right to shelter, you know, television and media rights. What are you talking about? It really wasn't part of the agenda. And we know that. We know that that superhighway went over the tops of people's heads, that if all our children had media rights today, I suppose they would all be online. They would know what we're doing. And then this pandemic that has overtaken us would probably not have been as big in terms of the media landscape and the online landscape. So this has been an important journey for us. It's almost my life's work, because I want to place African children on the global agenda. And hence, of course, the work that we are doing. I've been part of the World Summits globally. We work with UNICEF, with UNESCO. So internationally, I sit on CIFEJ, which is the International Center of Films for Children and Young People. It started in 1995. And at that time, you remember, you know, it was the Cold War. Countries needed to talk to each other. We needed to meet each other as producers and filmmakers. And so we needed to find a space in which to do that. What is really very sad right now is that that space is even more contested. We actually need more time to talk across borders. We sit in little boxes and you can see the world is going right. And I mean, as in right philosophy, so that we are not really engaging the way that we should in a democratic world where we should really, really care about children. And I think for me, Kathy, it's really important that we start with children. I know the first time I went to Prix Jeunesse, which is an international organization that works, they call themselves the Oscars of children's television, and it happens every second year. And I arrived there 26 years ago, you know, I was much younger, and I looked at all these old people who are now my age, and I was amazed that all the work that they were doing, their life's work was in children's media. That's all that they wanted to do. Yes. And we know in South Africa, you know, producers started off in children and said, oh, I'm going to grow up to be this big, you know, producer of documentaries or feature films. There wasn't a sense that this is my life's work, that talking to children, identity for children is actually the most important. And had we done that 26 years ago, Kathy, I think we would have been in a different trajectory as a country. Because 26 years later, we still have people in poverty. We still have really shoddy schools. We still don't have access to water, to food, to technology. So I think that, you know, we've actually done a disservice by thinking that we wanted to jump on this bandwagon above ourselves, when indeed where we should start is with children. And so I come into the session on the WAZI animations that we have just created. And if we can show the first one, because really what we wanted to do here was to talk to African children about being African, about identifying yourself as African, and really being proud of who you are as African. We can show that. Thank you. Thank you. So when we started the series, we actually started this a few years ago because we were trying to push African animation in South Africa. You probably know there have been so many different conversations with UNESCO, with the Mauritians, during, you know, the old URTNA days into the African Union of Broadcasters days. So there's a long conversation about African animation. Last year, South Africa, through the Department of Arts and Culture, hosted the Film Summit. And at that point, we spoke again about African animation. And as a company, our company's Moments Entertainment, we just decided that what we needed to do was to actually start the animation studio. And that's we brought together some young animators and we created the studio. And so what we wanted really was for us to have this young girl, WAZI, who's about 8 years old, discovering Africa initially, because I think there's also a concept in South Africa in terms of who we are as Africans. And I wanted the animators, you know, last year we hosted the Zanzibar International Film Festival, and I wanted the animators to come to Zanzibar to see the diversity of this continent, that we all do not look the same. We all do not speak the same language. We talk about different religions. You talk in, you know, in Zanzibar, a real strong Islamic point of view, you know, all these little children dressed up in hijab. How do we begin to produce content for the diversity of Africa? And so as we spoke about this, just probably about 10 days before the lockdown in South Africa, and as you know, we had the worst lockdown, I said to the team, actually, WAZI is not going to be discovering her wonderful world. So as you see her tumbling to the window to see the world, she's told, stay at home. And that was really what we needed to say to children. The reason you have to stay at home is because of this pandemic. There's this virus. Now, we also know that in the work that we do, that as adults, we forget to talk to children. So, for example, when the big events like 9/11 happened or the tsunami, you know, all my friends in broadcasting around the world spoke to children. The broadcasters said, we need to talk to children about what is happening. This did not actually happen in South Africa and in Africa for that matter. So what we really wanted was to speak to children about the virus. Please go ahead and show this one. Okay, so I will just talk over it because it seems that we're having some challenges around the sound. And what we wanted, because the animators were locked down at home, this was an amazing extension to the series, because basically little Musa is the son of one of the animators. So being locked down, we were all in our own offices, home offices. We created our own little studios. We had to talk via WhatsApp and online. And they said they would, you know, I was saying to them, I really wanted a little child's voice, another child besides WAZI. And that's how Musa started. You know, he was never part of the series. And I have to say, Kathy, when we completed it, I didn't know who we were going to give it to, because, you know, the broadcasting sector in South Africa is really difficult. There are gatekeepers. People don't want to give you opportunity, etc. So I put it out there. I sent it to the Asia Broadcasting Union on their email. And they were like, wow, this is amazing. Now, this is the sad fact that in South Africa, they wouldn't take it. But here you have the Asia Broadcast. This is India, China, Japan, Indonesia. And they saying, yes, please, we want it. So we sent out the series there. I sent it to all the festivals globally that work in children's media. And they got really excited. And they started putting it up on their online so that all their members could see it. And then what we did was, look, if we're going to talk to an international audience, maybe we should ask international children to send us little clips. And it all had to do about washing hands. And if you remember, everybody was saying, wash your hands for 20 seconds and sing happy birthday. And that's really what we did. So we started to get these little animations from people globally, and we embedded live action in the animation. And so there were children that came out of, you know, the UAE, and little communities in rural communities, because the other thing is everybody does not go to a basin, open a tap and start washing their hands. Let's see which one we have now.
And hope we have sound.
Yes, yeah, we've got sound.
What are you doing to keep safe from the coronavirus?
I have to stay at my house and wash my hands. I have to stay at my house.
Staying home can help keep you safe from getting the virus.
And wash my hands.
Yep, you should always wash your hands with soap and water to stay healthy. Wash your hands for at least 20 seconds, or you can sing happy birthday 2 times. Those are some great tips, Musa.
Thank you. Yay. At least we had some there. That was great.
Awesome.
You need to tell me about time so that I'm not.
So what I was going to say is I think that we've really got an amazing exposure to that awesomeness, and I just want to quickly ask you, because I know that you've built this animation studio with youngsters. So we've got the first section. And I also want you to talk about WAZI, who has is it called Vitiligo? Yes,
yeah.
Which I think is fabulous, because we finally got into a world where people are people, and that's awesome, and our heroes are people, albeit that they're animated, but that's real, really. Your animation studio, are they working from 2D into 3D? So did they do the back end and you had an original front end? How did that work?
So they actually did everything. And these are, the company is called Popeye. They're young people. We actually met them at the workshop with Sesame. The other good thing I have to tell you is that we entered this WAZI animation into the Pre-Jeunesse as part of the COVID productions, and there we were amongst the top 10 with Sesame New York. We were on zero budget, and you know Sesame, I mean, people, we're talking millions of rand here, and our team, we were locked down in our little offices, working, you know, on WhatsApp, sending scripts, changing scripts, getting in little Musa, who's the son of the animator, you know, that kind of energy, which was just fantastic. The team have studied animation, so they are the ones who work. And as an experienced company, our idea is really on mentorship and ensuring, for me, very importantly, that the voices of African children and the look and feel of an African child. I think that was really important in the way that we developed the series.
Well, it's worked fantastically, and I think Popeye are an extraordinary studio. I also wanted them to be with us, and certainly in our next edition they will be. I think that provides a fabulous segue into Glenn, who has been in this game for a zillion years, although he only looks 22, and who's been in animation for an extended period of time, running a commercial animation studio, but with deep commitment to education, and to education through gamification, through animation, and etc. I think we're going to try work with your show reel before we go into you, Glenn, if that's okay. Unfortunately, I'm going to say on air, our team in the back is fabulous. But for anybody who knows real broadcasting, you've got 40 people running around, 10 just in the control room. We're dealing with a massive platform globally that keeps crashing on us, and with Eskom and with Wi-Fi. So, hey guys, this is Africa, and we like to expose the bare backbones of the workroom, where we've got 1.5 people working. So, and we're in separate houses. So, and I love it this way. So, having now taken up your airtime, Glenn, I think let's go straight into your show reel. And if we also have sound problems, I'm sure you can talk us through some of it. Okay. So let's see how it goes. In the meanwhile, you can start talking while the show reel gets.
Thank you very much indeed.
So, and I want, before you go anywhere, you've got to tell us why you called it Seamonster. I know you've probably got something else prepared to start with, but tell us about Seamonster.
You know, in times where we didn't know what lay over the horizon and we were scared, we used to draw sea monsters at the edge of our maps. And there were a few brave souls who would go out and find new places and explore the world. And I think now more, and I just, listening to Firdoze is a real inspiration to remind us all that if we do not give hope to this generation of young people, specifically in an African context, I think that is the disease of our time. And so, yes, it's called Seamonster because we have to all be brave now more than ever. We have to have an aspiration which is beyond the here and now. And and we're from Cape Town, you know, so sure well. So I fell into the animation industry by accident. I'm not a reluctant, game designer or animation director. And I got asked to come into a company called Clockwork Zoo, which at the time was I think the biggest animation studio in Africa. And they had just completed 3 series of Urbo. And for those of you who remember, Urbo was on the SABC at the time, and it was just an extraordinary creative feat. And it had some of the best writers in the country who were really working on it. And I think it really speaks to some of these higher purpose things about reflecting our own language, our own voice in that story. And it was struggling, but I remember the first time I walked in and there were about 150 people working on the show in some form or another, all very young and incredibly passionate and just great storytellers and amazing artists. We landed 2 international projects, one with a Canadian company. So we did the first animation co-production through the treaty at the time, which was interesting. And we then did a show for a company called Disney. You think they're going to be big in animation. And it was great. We delivered everything on time. And as Firdoze says, you know, what we managed to do in South Africa and the value that we deliver, because, you know, we're not a traditional outsourced destination. And in fact, we wrote half the scripts for the Disney show in South Africa. And when it came time to do the reconciliation of who had done what work, Disney was like, we don't even know. I mean, there was just such an amazing exchange of ideas. So, yeah, unfortunately, the operation was a success, but the patient died, and Clockwork Zoo did not survive. I did not see a way to sustain it. It was undercapitalized. There were all sorts of challenges. And out of the ashes of that 9 years now ago, Seamonster was born. And maybe if I may just quickly grab my screen and just kind of give you some of the principles that sort of underpin what we do, if that's okay with you guys. Just checking that you can kind of see this one. Is that right?
No,
cool.
We can't
see it?
It's fine.
Okay, no problem.
We've got a buffer.
Okay,
there we go.
Okay.
Yes, but you must
cut
cool. Full image, please, as we've seen all your slides.
I will do. As you say, it's live broadcast, so we'll just make it happen. So guys, just roll with me for 1 sec. If it doesn't work, there we go. And I will hide that. No, it just doesn't want to work. So let me just stop sharing. Okay. Oh, well, let's give it one more chance. How's that?
Yeah.
Does that work for you, Kathy? Okay, cool. All right. So as we've all agreed,
you can try one more if you want. You know, because you're a very visual man, and we're all very visual people. And
let's give it one more bash.
We'll look at your whole computer and read your email at the same time. It's fabulous.
Please, if you can help me with some of those responses, I'd be delighted. Marvelous. So you know, I think I've given some context to how I think, and we know that animation cuts across cultures and literacy levels, and in a way that no other format does. And so that's the one part that really inspires us. And of course, we know that if you want to shift behavior, and I guess we'd all do in some form, It's going to come because of your relationship with archetype. So I'm not going to tell two amazing filmmakers about what they do, but really it isn't because there's more information. It's because of our deep relationship with archetype. But you know, Africa's disease, I guess, is hopelessness. We feel sometimes that through our own actions we can't shift the world around us. And of course, games are one way that Africans and humanity has been giving rules and feedback and systems to that. So for us, this is what we do at Seamonster. But as I said, stories really are what gives us hope. It's what shapes our self view. So I could not begin to articulate that any more brilliantly than Firdoze did there. So we know that stories really are how we shape that. But here's an idea for you. I'm going to just try and hide this thing. If every time I do that, it just buggers it up. So we'll just leave it. So okay. So if you think about like why we tell stories, you know, now it's a simplistic view, of course, you know. So it's to inform. There's social reasons, there's cultural reasons. So let's put that all sort of in one bucket. And of course, we do that to entertain. I need to share our history and to educate and pass on knowledge. And of course, we do it for commercial reasons. But if you look at what the effect of technology has had, and yes, of course, the digital divide continues to grow, and COVID has done us no favors in showing us up for how poor we've been in responding to crossing that divide. But a couple of trends really, you know, devices have become more intuitive. Luckily, the cost of smartphones are coming down, and hopefully over the next decade will become more pervasive. Data costs will come down. But the question is, again, do I really have agency? Am I just a passive consumer? What am I doing with the power of that new technology? So because of this new interaction, which is teed up, this really talks to why Seamonster believes that games are such an important part of that. So I've mentioned goals and feedback and other things, but one of the critical things about games actually are that they are voluntary in their nature. You know, its opposite is called work, and that's why they've got to pay us to do it. And of course, in some sense, all entertainment is a choice. And again, how big or small that choice is very much a function of that. So I am a recovering consultant, and so forgive the matrix, but I'd really like to offer this to the world. It's available under Creative Commons.
We haven't had one yet. This whole 1.5 days, and it's going to be our only one.
I know, but I hope that it is of value to you. And so what we've got here is really the value chain that we all know so well, which is down the left-hand side, and a highly simplified, where we come up with the idea for WAZI and we figure out how we're going to kind of make it, and we talk about those things. And then, as Firdoze was saying, like, so who's the market in this whole thing? Okay, so that we understand, and to a large extent, technology actually affects the how. It doesn't really affect the why. So you remember those big 4 buckets that we were talking about over there. Now, what's happened, of course, is that traditionally, entertainment has largely been funded by the commercial vertical, isn't it? Do you remember ads, those things that used to interrupt our watching? And for those of us fortunate enough to be able to screen. Now, of course, with video on demand services and the ability to do what's called over-the-top transmissions on cell phone platforms, you know, you're going to go more to a subscription-based model. So at Seamonster, our fundamental premise is that learning, forgive me for saying this, is a business opportunity. And what do I mean by that? I mean that Africa is the youngest continent. Africa is in some sense the most divided continent. And if companies understand that there's an opportunity here, that they need to involve themselves, they need to help to solve this challenge. Now that sounds very touchy-feely, and you know, but it's not. I want to argue, and we built Seamonster on the premise that actually doing good is good for business, and that we need to find ways to scale and sustain this thing. So let me just come out of this for a sec, because I've really said what I wanted to do there, and I'll wrap up in a minute to say,
all good.
for me, in the creative industries, if we are going to take this incredible opportunity that we have and this rich store of talent and this imperative for people to be able to see themselves in the world, Black lives do matter. And yet, again, I'll leave it to you guys to comment on that. So for me, it's not only that we need to show that we can do these things, but how do we scale this? How do we sustain this? How do we create decent jobs in the creative industries across Africa? Because without doing that, we're not going to set up that virtuous cycle where we get young Black talent in who can grow up, mature, have children, buy a house, do these kinds of things. And the creative industries can do that. It should do that. And then that will solve the issue of being able to reflect and control what we deliver in the media. So for me, it's about scale, it's about sustainability, and it's about understanding that the creative industries is a real thing. And yeah, I'm just so passionate about it. I plead with companies and I convince them, we do as Seamonster, that going out and teaching financial education is in their best interest. We've just delivered with Fundaba, with FNB, a series of animated content in 5 languages on how to start a business, all using animation, all delivered free, no cost to anybody in South Africa. It's available on their site. And all you do is, have you got an idea? Have you got a business? All those things. And animation is perfect for that, for children, for everybody. But those are just some of the thoughts that I would put into the mix for today.
My bad. I should have asked us to actually have Fundaba available, to the Fundaba animation available. But I'm sure people can find it. But for me, that's a marvelous kickoff point, because I think that provides the interface. In some of the discussions we've been having over the past 2 days, we've run between the session before us, which looks at 4IR, and where Sankoba spoke about how we've got to run the fourth industrial revolution simultaneously, because there's no way to wait for the catch-up. So on that level, we know we are in there. Whenever I run innovation sessions, the first question I ask people is, what is the most ubiquitous cell phone in Africa? And everybody thinks it's a smartphone, but it isn't. So it's how do we start working with the technology that exists, but transfer people into new platforms, etc. And I'm sure we've got a big debate around that one. Also really important, and I love that I'm going to plug the Fundaba app, and hopefully FNB will sponsor it next year. But what I love about that is that we've all, the 3 of us, I think, been begging for business to get behind edutainment, as we used to call it in the old days, and maybe still do. And it's taken a long time. And even with BBB, EE incentives, where there's all tax deductions, and I harped on about that yesterday, there's really worthwhile ways for business to seriously train up talent in what is the most natural thing. I've worked very hard in the STEM industry until I decided it's time to get back into my industry. STEAM is as important as STEM. Arts and sciences are one, and we need, sorry, this is my moment. I don't know why I'm shouting at the converted, but we need to be making sure that we are integrating all our creative talent into the 4th industrial revolution with us. And what I love about what you've done with your historic internships, and what Firdoze is doing amazingly well with her studio now, and with all the work she's always done, is that we are able, the one thing we can do in the creative industry is take people in and train them from now. And they are functional and amazing. They do not, youngsters without a matric do not need to come into the workplace and just sit in the scullery. And so I think there's so much value to add from the creative industries, and it's for business to see that value, and for government. And another point, and I'm going to ask you to dilate on that a little bit, Glenn. You've worked with policy, and I know that Firdoze has, but we've had some very progressive moves from, for example, the DTI. Do those incentives still exist for the film industry and for the animation industry?
Yeah, they do. And I think both Firdoze and I were involved in some way of shaping them. If you recall my matrix, what we did initially was we designed an incentive to bring basically large scale productions to South Africa. And so providing services to the world is definitely one element that you need. Unfortunately, animation and game projects and even local productions follow a very, very different rhythm. By the time an international project lands, it's pre-packaged, it's good to go. It's quite an intensive process. And even doing service work and using the DTI rebate, and that is just barely possible because, what is your first day of principal photography? We're like, what do you mean? It's animation. So we didn't really make the transition into a dynamic set of rules. In fact, we should not have tried to use the rules that were applied to service and apply them to local production in any way, because it will take 3 to 5 years for a script to mature. And so it's there, it is being used, but I know that there's a lot of movement around trying to incentivize companies and build industrial capacity. The clue's in the name, isn't it? So that you build studios, small, big, and others, so we have a much more vibrant ecosystem, and then the projects will come from that. So it's actually got more in common with something like the call center incentive scheme than it does with the film incentive scheme. It's people working. And the beauty about it, of course, in the creative industries is we own the content. In a call center, you're selling hours. So it's a blend of those two. And so it's not perfect. It needs to be completely rewritten, in my view. It needs to be massively simplified, the administration.
Is then because the problem with the DTI incentive, Kathy, is that there's the services industry. I think they don't even cap it. It's something like 50 million. And yet when we talk about developing so young Black film professionals, those incentives are very low. They went right down to emerging filmmakers at $1 million. I think it started at 500,000 to R1 million. So it is just so badly skewed. And part of the conversation that we're having as African and Black filmmakers in South Africa is that DTI incentive is not talking to development. It's not giving support to the people who need it. And so, I mean, part of our challenge as the Black Filmmakers Consortium is the concern around how the DTI actually came up with some of these policies, and that Black people were left out of the equation when they were supposed to have been part of the conversation. So the incentive might be there, but who's accessing it? And I think many companies decided to go the services route because they don't have to look at BE, they don't need to look at development, they don't need to look at support. And that's a huge concern, given that the South Africa we are in right now.
So Firdoze, if I were to say to you, because you've sat on a lot of policy bodies, you've worked for film festivals, you've created broadcasting platforms and etc. What for you would be the optimal policy to ensure or incentive to ensure young talent is brought in, and that's this industrial complex that Glenn talks about, and maybe that's the wrong approach. What is your ideal?
Well, I probably would like to look at what a very long time ago when we were in Italy and we were trying to understand. I remember with the then South African embassy, how is it that these Italians do so well in design? And you find really like the moms and pops little shop that has created all this quality. So it was not on an industrial scale. It was in the old days, if you went to Florence, you could go from one shop to the other and each were unique and beautiful and complete. And now you have globalization. And where do we fit in that picture? If you go to the airport, if you can now with the pandemic, if you walk into a store in the airport, whether you are in Milan, New York, Johannesburg, Lagos, they are selling exactly the same thing. So that's a big problem. I think what we need is still to look at what is, we used to say local is lekker. We need to spend time on producing for our own. And I think part of, if you might have just seen now the new advert with John Carney about buying local. And Kathy, you've been amazing in that. You've look at, you know, what you wear, how you ensure that local content, local people, local merchandising products are produced. I think what the DTI needs to do is to consider that, particularly, again, coming back to COVID, the fact that we are not being able to buy from somewhere else. We're having to buy local. We're talking about making masks that are local, talking about hand sanitizers that are local. We have lost our indigenous culture, our indigenous knowledge systems, and that's where we ought to be putting in our money. So when it comes to film and animation, it's about local storytelling. It's not about, for me, bringing in international people to come and use our cheap rebates, our cheap crew, our wonderful technology, but at a very, very reduced price. What we ought to be doing is to be building capacities for ourselves, for our young people. And it's not just taking a kid out of somewhere and saying, oh, we plunk you into the creative industries and you're going to be fine. No, you need to understand the background. We need to understand who we are. We need to grow up in terms of our own cultures, in terms of who we as 3 South Africans sitting here, 2 white people and 1 Indian, you know, where are the African voices? Where are the Black people? Where are the young Black emerging, fantastic, and not only emerging, but developed? Because why is it that Africans are always emerging? How many more events?
So I'm going to interrupt you. I have to say that we are going
to be at a workshop, and I'd say to her, you ought to be running these workshops. Why are you attending the workshop?
No, but so wait, I'm going.
It has to be a shift, Kathy, in the way that we see that this is not a dig at you. I understand the challenges. I'm just saying that the voices of young Black people, we are not hopeless. So the point about saying, you know, as Africa, we feel hopeless, we don't. We actually, I run a broadcaster in Nigeria, Minaj Broadcasting. It goes out, if you think about Nigeria as 200 million plus people, Minaj goes out to 50 million people. 50 million people who are excited about who they are. We started the ABC, which we called Africa's Best Channel, and we have young people producing content for that channel in Nigeria. And they come at their own cost, their own time. They really committed to storytelling. Now, that kind of, all you're doing is you're creating spaces for people so that that talent comes into a space. But I also say to people, just because you have a pen does not mean that you can write a novel. So because you have a smartphone does not mean you're an animator, does not mean you're a storyteller, does not mean that you are suddenly a camera person. You do need of the trade, and it is important for us as mentors, as the older people, to know that there is an ABC that all these young people have to go through, and they need to become proficient in their work. It's not about putting somebody up there and whitewashing, or, you know, let's just bring in this person and say, oh, look what we're doing. We do it the same with Popeye. They are people who have been trained, but if I ask them to name me one African filmmaker, they cannot. You've been to a school, a film school in South Africa, where they did not teach you about African filmmakers and African storytelling. They don't know that. They're two amazing Black people whose view of Africa is the township, or maybe Soweto, or maybe Rosebank. It is not a global continent African view.
If I may, I think that what's really been amazing about this 3-day campus party is that other than this particular channel, we have pretty much gone to young people. And I actually tried to reach out to Popeye because I think their work is extraordinary. But the whole thing, I'm going to contest a little bit, because I think from my perspective, there's a huge amount we have done to elevate South Africa over the years. And I think in terms of the framing, that is the framing we're talking about. So for number one, for the design industry, we've had some reference to it earlier in the series, and there will be more. Nando's, who've poured their money into South African design and art, now only outfits with South African design. Globally, all our commercial directors keep going overseas. So we hone amazing Black talent, and it gets eaten up by overseas. I mean, the decolonialization, if I can call it that, but it gets colonized and taken to Los Angeles, to London, to Italy, to wherever. So, and I think that we have over the years honed many Black filmmakers, etc. So, but where the money
Kathy, I don't know how many Black filmmakers we have honed. I think you need to tell me who they are.
Okay. But if I can just complete my thought, what I'd really like to say is that we do celebrate local. And I think that this whole shift to Africanization, and thank you for commenting on the fact that I celebrate Africa in what I wear. And I think that there has been this massive shift and this massive voice. And one of our co-sponsors, shall I call it, between 10 and if I could remember the name of the company, but the online magazine is a constant celebration. Our graffiti artists get taken up and flown overseas, etc. So I think in the broader creative industries, we've seen this amazing drive. So what I'm wanting to say is I hear you totally, even though you might think I don't. But for me, what is the one key to unlocking this if you're feeling it's not happening? And I agree with you, it might not be happening, but if you had to come up with one incentive, okay, so I'm asking you to give me a positive policy. You've sat on these policy boards. What would be your one incentive? How would you structure something to ensure that these people, what you say should happen, will happen? What would incentivize government or business? And should we be talking to DTI, to small business, to arts and culture? Is that the problem that they fractured? Have you got...
We're talking to all of them. You probably are aware of this new Facebook group called I'm for the Arts.
Yes.
And this wonderful opera singer, Sibongile, who just said she was fed up. This is an internationally renowned personality who can say, as a Black South African, I am fed up. We are not getting the support that we want. And I think, Kathy, this is why you and I and Glenn need to step back. And we need to say that the voices of people are still drowned. And that as much as you might see a different picture, I see a different one, and Glenn will see a totally other one. The point of the fact of the matter is for 16,000 people to join a Facebook page in 5 days with Black people, it tells you what people are feeling. And these are people who are not even online. These are people who do not have access. And having been part of that, I just joined them as a lobbyist and on the advocacy committee. I'm amazed because, like you, I want to celebrate 26 years of democracy. I want to say that we took people out of really shanty towns. I did a series called Building a Nation, where we traveled to the length and breadth of this country. We spoke to every single premier during Madiba's time, because Madiba said to us, as Black journalists, can you please tell another story? Don't create story, but tell a good story of what the new South Africa is doing. And we did that. And we found people who were saying, we did not have running water. We did not have electricity. This new South Africa has given this to us. And we celebrate that and we applaud that. But I just did, for Madiba's 100 years, a documentary entitled Mandela, a True Pan-Africanist. And when I spoke to youth in South Africa, we hosted an event at the Apartheid Museum, and mainly Black youth across the bar, whether they were ANC, DA, EFF, so all the different political parties, there were many who said that they did not believe in the Rainbow Nation, that they did not think Mandela was a true Pan-African. I mean, I said they're appalled. I wanted to cry, that young people did not see the shift. They did not see the opportunities. And we filmed in Algeria and we filmed in Tunisia. And the Tunisian youth, who were the same age as the youth we spoke to in South Africa, who were still mesmerized by the Madiba magic, had such wonderful things to say. And yet at home, our young people are saying, no, you left us out. You did not do what you were meant to do. So I think it's not a simple thing of what would that policy be. I think what we have to do is to listen to the young people. We need to give them the platforms. We need to listen to them advising us. And, you know, I say this because as an activist in 1980, by 1994, we were wondering whether we should allow 16-year-olds the vote. If you remember, the 76 generation were youth who changed the trajectory of our country. So the voices of young people are so important and need to be here. And they will tell us what we need, whether we need to be giving it to services or whether we need to be giving it to people in rural communities who have no access. Thanks, Kathy.
We are running out of time, and you've said so much, and I would so love to continue. But I think that the point is made. The voice of the youth is required. But I also feel that social media, which has totally allowed people an opportunity, it's democratized media totally. Everybody now has a voice and an opinion. At times, I think, shifts opinion, and perhaps we've lost our celebration through social media and the media that we are all able to influence ourselves. And so I think that those voices still keep coming through. And on Instagram, we're seeing this amazing Africa that I think I see every day. But I think that we have to wrap up. So I'm going to hope that we can get WAZI, the young WAZI, with a voice to close off. But I think, Glenn, if you just want to give us one closing comment, for those you've given us so much to think about. Glenn, if you'd like to give us a closing comment, and then I think we will, before we play out, I'm going to give the floor to Glenn, and before we play out, amazing ideas. I think why I kept pushing you is to let everybody know that after this, a slide will come up. There's a call for ideas from the Global Campus Party. Usually it's a massive hackathon. This year, it's just a call for ideas, which means please tell Dipopai and all the others, if they've got an idea, enter it before Campus Party ends globally. And global funders are there. For those of us who've been working in the mask business, read me, there's a mask prize from the Netherlands, not really, a €1 million prize for anybody who can come up with a social distancing technology or solution. So I'm putting it out there for those who are looking for funding, who've got awesome ideas, where Firdoze or Glenn can't accommodate people, that's the place to go. Glenn, tell me something awesome, inspire me, lead me to the edge of the continent and the world. Show me that Seamonster. That sounded terrible.
Okay, cool. So I just want to say a couple of quick things. To pick back up on some of the stuff that Sunkorba was talking about in the 4IR stuff, and some of the things Firdoze was referencing. The challenge is, in some sense, very simple. We need to give kids hope. We need to give them opportunity. They do have a voice, and we need to allow them to express that. And so fully aligned with absolutely everything around that. But it is hard work, and this ability to problem solve. That's again what defines the creative industries. Really, again, the clue's in the name, isn't it? And so those are the same skills. This growth mindset, this resilience, that are the skills that we need for 4IR. So yes, we have to fight both the last war, because we have not won that by any stretch of the imagination, but we also need to fight the next war. And as you say, and if you think about the social media channels and all the ways that the new entertainment models are still emerging, for me, it's the answer doesn't really lie in us looking to government. They are an enabler at best, or hopefully can kind of just get out of the way and make things a little easier. And yes, they've got very, very big challenges that they need to focus on. So for me, we need to focus on demand. We need to focus on getting access to channels, because the supply isn't really the problem. We have this incredible pool of talent, these amazing stories to share with the world. And if we can focus on sales and distribution, and finding ways to monetize social media channels. This is the next war that I'm referring to. Nobody has figured this stuff out. We can actually be at the forefront of this revolution, and then, you know, we will have the platforms that we need. So yeah, I think there's a lot of work to be done. A lot has been done. A lot needs to be celebrated. But I don't rest for 1 second, because I think there is a crisis on so many different levels, whether it's environmental or anything else. And animation and stories will change the world one way or another. Let's hope for the better.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. Firdoze, have you got a closing 1 sentence? Or are you happy?
You thank.
Oh, that's a beautiful and I thank both of you for a highly spirited and very exciting discussion. And I'm hoping we'll carry this on Firdoze's platform or any other platform in the future. Glenn, we look forward to you inviting us and all our awesome animators to come and collaborate with you in the future. And then we've got Viacom on later. Let's all start haranguing them now, guys. But in the meanwhile, let's hopefully, if we can get it up, get WAZI's wonderful voice to close off for us. And anyone watching, don't forget your call for ideas. Thank you so much to both of you for really giving us your best.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, lele. Oh, lele. Moliba makasi.
Oh, lele. Oh, lele, moliba makasi. Oh, lele. Oh, lele,
Oh,
You.
Thank you all, and all the very best to everybody. And let's just believe in WAZI. And we didn't even get to how you got to fund it, that you're doing it for you with UNESCO and who else. But guys, join Firdoze's online platform. It's on Facebook, and it's called
The F Show.
and
And I will talk to you about monetizing. I'm ready for that.
okay, don't forget the F Show. Thank you all, and have a fabulous day.